There's a little brass plaque by the door of the library at Eastside Middle School, and it has my name on it, and I promise you that is the single most ridiculous thing that has ever happened, because when I went to that school I was a girl who spent 4 years trying very hard to be a part of the wall. If you'd lined up every kid at Eastside back then and asked a teacher to point out the one whose name would end up on a building someday, I would have been the last child anybody picked, if they remembered I was there to pick it all. I teach there now, 7th grade English, the same hallway I once tried to vanish into, and most mornings I walk past that plaque on my way in, and I touch it, just 2 fingers, the way you'd touch wood for luck, and I think about an old man in a hospital form, and the afternoon I learned that the smallest, quietest thing a person can do is sometimes the loudest thing they'll ever say. Let me tell you how my name got on that wall. It starts with a girl nobody saw, and a man with a secret he'd kept for 70 years. Back then I was Essie Boone, 11 and then 12 and then 13 across the years this happened, and quiet wasn't a phase for me, it was a whole climate. Some kids are shy. I was beyond shy, down in some deeper country where talking to people felt like stepping off a curb you couldn't see the bottom of. We didn't have money. My mama Charmaine cleaned rooms and mopped floors at Mercy General over on the east side, evening shifts mostly. And we didn't have a daddy in the picture, and we didn't have anybody to watch me after school, so from about the 5th grade on, where I went after the last bell was the hospital. I rode the bus straight to Mercy, and I set up in a corner of the 3rd floor family waiting room with my backpack and my library books, and I did my homework and I read, hour after hour, while my mother cleaned the floors of a building that never once learned her name, until her shift ended, and we rode home together in the dark. That waiting room raised me as much as anybody did. I knew which vending machine ate your quarters and which vinyl chair had the rip you could fit a whole library book into for safekeeping. I knew the night nurses by their walks before I knew their faces, and I knew how to be so still and so quiet that grown people forgot I was there, which is a skill you only learn if you've spent a lot of time being a kid that nobody's coming to pick up. Books were the whole of it for me. The library was my favorite place on this earth, the one building where being quiet was the rule instead of the problem, and my library card, a soft, bent, taped-up thing I'd renewed so many times the lady knew me, that card was the most valuable thing I owned. I want you to remember the card. It comes back around. It wasn't that I had nothing to say. That's the thing people get wrong about quiet kids. My head was loud as a marching band. I had whole worlds in there, from all those books, opinions, and arguments and jokes I never let out. I just couldn't find the door between the inside and the outside, and the few times I'd tried, it had gone badly. There was a girl named Tanya who decided in the 4th grade that I was funny to pick on precisely because I wouldn't pick back, and she'd narrate me to her friends in the cafeteria. Watch, she won't even look up, she's not even a real person. And the worst part was that I'd prove her right, every time, by not looking up, because looking up cost more than I had. So I shrank. I got good at it. By 12 I could go a whole school day saying maybe 10 words out loud, and most days nobody noticed the silence, which both saved me and broke my heart a little, the way a thing can do both at once. My mama saw me though. Charmaine Boone came home from mopping a hospital smelling like bleach with her feet swollen in her shoes, and she'd sit on the edge of my bed and ask me what I read that day, and she'd listen to all of it, every word. Like my quiet little book reports were the news of the world. She used to tell me, "Baby, still water runs deep, and one day the world's gonna find out how deep you run." I didn't believe her. Mothers have to say things like that. But I held on to it anyway, down in the deep part, and it turned out she was right, in a way neither of us could have dreamed up. If you were ever the quiet one, the kid in the corner that the loud world read right past, the one teachers called sweet but not really a standout, the one who learned early that the safest thing to be is unnoticed, then this one's yours, and I hope you'll stay through the whole thing. And if there was ever a single grown-up who looked at the quiet you and saw something worth seeing, go ahead and subscribe in their honor, because this is a story about exactly that kind of grown-up, and the world needs more of them than it's got. The afternoon that changed everything, I almost didn't notice him, which tells you something, since not noticing was supposed to be my specialty. He came into the 3rd floor waiting room on a gray Tuesday in October, an old man, big once and shrinking now the way they do, in a flannel shirt buttoned all the way up and work boots that had seen 40 years. He had a clipboard in his hands, the hospital kind, a thick stack of forms clamped to it, and a cheap pen on a string, and he sat down 2 seats from me and he stared at those papers like they were written in a language nobody on earth could read. I went back to my book. None of my business. I was good at none of my business, but he didn't fill anything out. He just sat there, turning the pages, holding them close to his face and then far away, his jaw working. A clerk came by with one of those clipboards want-it-back smiles and said, "Mr. Dunbar, we really do need those completed before they can take you back. Are you having trouble?" And the old man, Mr. Dunbar, got this look on his face that I knew from the inside, the particular hot terror of being asked to do a thing in front of people that you cannot do. "I left my reading glasses," he said. "I'll get to it." And the clerk said something cheerful and went away, and he didn't get to it, because it wasn't the glasses, and I understood that the second he said it, because a kid who's spent her life watching from a corner gets very good at reading the things people are trying not to show. Earl Dunbar couldn't read. Not really. Not the way that form needed reading. A man in his late 70s, and somewhere a long time ago, life had pulled him out of school before the letters ever locked into place, and he'd built a whole life around hiding it, and now he was sitting in a hospital about to have his chest opened up, and they'd handed him pages of consent forms and warnings, and his life was riding on whether he understood them, and he could not read a word of it, and he was too proud, and too scared, and too ashamed to say so to a single soul. I sat there for a while feeling my own heart pound, because helping meant talking, and talking meant stepping off the curb. But I kept watching him hold those pages up to the light like the meaning might shake loose, and I thought about how it would feel to be old and sick and alone and asked to sign your name to something you couldn't read, and how nobody should have to feel that, not ever. So I closed my book, and I got up, and I sat down in the chair right next to Mr. Dunbar, and I said the bravest sentence I had said out loud to a stranger in my entire life. I like reading. I could read those to you, if you want. I do it for my grandma sometimes. Which was a small lie. I didn't have a grandma anymore. But it was the kind of lie that hands a person a door to walk through with their head up. If a kid reads to her grandma, then a grown man letting a kid read to him isn't a shameful thing, it's just a Tuesday. He looked at me a long moment, this old man, sizing up whether I'd seen through him, and I made my face as plain and easy as I could, just a bookish kid offering to share the things she loved, no pity in it anywhere, because pity would have killed him, and I knew that even at 12. And something in him decided to trust me. He handed me the clipboard. My eyes, he said, holding on to the story we'd agreed on without saying we'd agreed on it. Forgot my glasses. Mighty. That happens, I said. These are real small print anyway. And then I read him his forms, line by line, every single line, not fast, not like a chore. I read him each line, and then I stopped and I told him what it meant in regular words. This part is just asking your name and your birthday. This part is the doctor's name. This part is the big one. This is the part where they explain what they're going to do to your heart and the things that could go wrong, and you don't sign it until you understand it. And I'll read it as many times as you want. He'd nod slow, and sometimes he'd ask a question in a low voice, and I'd read it again, and explain it again, and I never once let my voice do that thing grown-ups' voices do when they think you're slow, that bright, slow, careful thing that strips the dignity right off a person. I just talked to him like he was smart, because he was the smartest man I'd met. He just couldn't read, and those are two completely different things that the world is forever getting confused. It took the better part of an hour. We did the whole stack. And when we got to the line where he had to sign his name, his hand shook, and I saw that even his own name on a page was a hard thing for him. So I said, "You want? I'll point right where it goes and you just put your mark however you do it." And he wrote out EARL, slow and careful, and the rest in a kind of wave, and it was enough. It was legal. And he let out a breath I think he'd been holding for 70 years. Somewhere in the middle of it, around the page about the things that could go wrong, his hands had started to shake and his voice had gone thin. And I understood it wasn't the reading anymore, it was the fear. A man about to let people cut into his heart, with nobody in the world sitting beside him. So I read that scary page in a calm, flat voice like I was reading a recipe. And then I added a line that wasn't on the paper. "It says here they do this all the time and most folks come through it just fine, and you seem real strong to me." He looked at me, and his hands went still, and we kept going. A kid in a waiting room isn't supposed to be the thing steadying a grown man's hands. But there wasn't anybody else, and there I was, and you do the thing that's in front of you. "You're a good reader, young lady," he said. And then, quieter, looking at me different now. "You're a good deal more than that." He had his heart surgery. I know because he came back. After he healed up, he started turning up at that third-floor waiting room on the afternoons he had his follow-ups, and he'd find me in my corner with my books, and he'd sit down 2 chairs over like that first day, and after a while he started bringing his own mail, bills, letters, things from the bank, and I'd read those to him too, quiet, in the corner. 2 people the world had walked past finding each other in a room built for waiting. He never once said the word out loud, that he couldn't read. We both just kept up the gentle fiction that I was helping with the small print, and inside that fiction he could be a whole person, and I think it was the first time in his long life anybody had helped him with the thing without making him feel like less of a man for needing it. We had a routine by the dead of that winter. He'd come for his follow-ups on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and he learned my schedule, and he'd time it so he landed in that third-floor waiting room while I was there with my homework. He started bringing a thermos and 2 paper cups, and he'd pour me a cup of cocoa, store-brand packets, made too watery, the best cocoa I've ever had in my life, and we'd sit in the corner and work through whatever he'd brought. Bank letters, a notice about his property taxes. Once, a long letter from a lawyer about his will that he was very worried about, and I read it slow, and told him it just meant his money would go where he'd said it should, and he sat back relieved and said, "Lawyers ought to be made to write like a person." I laughed out loud, which I almost never did, and he looked pleased with himself for a week. He asked me things too, in that easy sideways way that doesn't scare a shy kid. What I was reading, what I wanted to be. And one afternoon I told him the truth I'd never told anybody, that I wanted to be a teacher. And then I told him the other truth right behind it, that the counselor at my school had told my mama I wasn't really the type that amounts to much, and that I figured she was probably right. Earl Dunbar set down his watery cocoa and looked at me, and he said, "Now you listen to me. I have spent 70 years letting one thing I couldn't do convince me of all the things I wasn't. It's a lie, child. The thing you can't do isn't the truth about you. The thing you just did for me, sitting here reading a stranger his bad news so he wouldn't have to be scared and alone, that's the truth about you. Don't you let some woman with a clipboard tell you different." I have repeated that sentence to myself maybe 10,000 times since. The thing you can't do isn't the truth about you. He couldn't read, and he was the wisest person I knew. Slowly I got pieces of him. Earl Dunbar had left school in the 3rd grade to work, back when poor kids did that, and he'd never caught up on the letters, and he'd spent his whole life terrified somebody would find out. But he had a head for numbers and a back for work, and a stubbornness that wouldn't quit, and he'd built, quietly, over 50 years, a road paving and construction supply company that did business all over the state. He was, it turned out, a wealthy man. A wealthy man who could not read a menu, who'd memorized which gas pump was which by the color, who had his secretary read him his own contracts and told her it was his eyes, who'd lived 7 decades in a low constant hum of shame that one day the trick would stop working and the whole world would see. He'd never married, never had kids. The reading thing had walled him off from too much, and here he was, near the end of it, letting a 12-year-old girl read him his bank statements in a hospital waiting room, because she'd never once made him feel small for it. I want to stop and tell you what I didn't understand then and do now, because it took me years to see it. I thought I was just being nice. I thought I was reading some forms. What I was actually doing, without knowing it, was the rarest thing in the world. I was meeting a man's deepest shame with plain ordinary grace, like it was nothing, like it cost nothing, and in doing that I was telling him a thing nobody had ever told him, that he was not less, that the thing he couldn't do did not subtract from the man he was. I didn't know I was saying that. Kids don't know the size of what they do, but he heard it. He heard it loud. "If your chest is getting tight, hold on, because there's a turn coming, and before it I'll just say this, share this with the quietest person you know, the one who helps and never makes a thing of it, the one who's so easy to overlook, because I'd bet money they're carrying more good in them than anybody's ever bothered to notice. Now let me take you to the assembly, where my whole quiet life cracked open in front of the entire school. In the spring of my 8th grade year, Eastside Middle was, to put it kindly, a school the city had given up on. 40 years old and looked 60, with buckets in the hallways when it rained, and textbooks held together with tape and a library, my beloved library, that hadn't gotten a new book in a decade, where I'd read everything on the shelves twice. The kind of school where a lot of the adults had quietly decided which kids were worth the trouble, and a quiet poor girl in a corner was not, as a rule, on that list. There was a counselor named Miss Hargrove, and the year before I'd been close enough to overhear her tell my mother, in the careful kind voice, that I was a sweet girl but we have to be realistic about a child like Essie, that I wasn't really an academic standout, and my mama shouldn't set her up for disappointment by aiming too high. I was standing right there. They thought I was too quiet to be listening. People always thought that. Asterisk a child like Essie. I carried that sentence around in me like a stone for a year. So there we all were in the gym for a special assembly, the whole school folded onto the pull-out bleachers because, word was, some big mystery donor had come forward, the biggest gift in the school's history, and the superintendent was there, and the news cameras were there, and even the mayor's office had sent somebody. The principal got up and made a speech about a transformational anonymous gift and a new chapter for Eastside, and everybody clapped, and then he said the donor had asked to say a few words and to no longer be anonymous, and a man walked out to the microphone in the middle of that gym floor. Earl Dunbar, in a suit this time, stiff and uncomfortable in it, but him, unmistakably him, my old man from the 3rd floor waiting room. I stopped breathing. I genuinely did not understand, for a second, how the two halves of my life had ended up in the same room, the hospital corner and the school gym, like a dream where the wrong people show up. He stood at that microphone and he looked out at all those kids, and he was nervous. You could see it. A man who'd spent his life avoiding rooms with letters and microphones in them. And then he started to talk, and he didn't read from a card, because of course he didn't. He couldn't. He just spoke from the middle of his chest. He told them he was giving the school the largest gift he had ever given anyone or anything. Enough to fix the roof and the heat and the buckets. Enough for new books and new computers. Enough for a brand new library. Enough for scholarships so kids from Eastside could go on to college whether their families had a dime or not. The gym went up, and then he raised his hand for quiet, and he said he wanted to tell them why, and the why is the part one will carry to my grave. I am 78 years old, Earl Dunbar said into that microphone, in front of 400 children and the cameras and the mayor's man and God, and I am a wealthy man, and I cannot read. You could have heard a pin drop. A grown man, telling a room full of strangers the secret he'd hidden for 70 years. I left school in the 3rd grade and I never learned, and I have spent my whole life ashamed of it and hiding it, and I built everything I built with that shame sitting on my chest like a stone. A few months ago, I was in a hospital, about to have my heart operated on, and they handed me papers I had to understand and couldn't, and I sat in a chair too proud and too scared to tell a soul. And a child from this school, a quiet girl who was in that waiting room doing her homework while her mama worked. That child saw me. She came over, and she read me every line, and she explained every word, and she did it for the better part of an hour, and she never once, not for 1 second, made me feel like less of a man for needing it. A 12-year-old girl gave me my dignity back in a room full of strangers, for nothing, expecting nothing. His voice was going now, this big old man, and he didn't fight it. I asked her what school she went to, and I decided that any school that grows a child like that is a school worth everything I've got. So I went and found out what this place needed, and I'm giving it, all of it. Because of one quiet girl nobody was looking at, who looked at me. And then Earl Dunbar lifted his head and found me in those bleachers. He'd known right where I was the whole time. And he said, into the microphone, "Essie Boone, stand up, sweetheart. Let them see you." 400 heads turned. Every kid who'd never noticed me. Every teacher who'd read past me. Every single person in that gym turned and looked at the girl in the corner of the bleachers. The quiet one. The one who tried to be a part of the wall. And I have never in my life wanted to disappear more. And I have never in my life been less able to. My mama was there. They'd brought her up from her shift. She still had her work shirt on. And she was crying, both hands over her mouth. And I stood up on legs that didn't feel like mine. And the whole school stood up too. And they clapped for me, the quiet girl, until the sound filled the whole gym and pressed against the windows. I found Miss Hargrove's face in the crowd. Asterisk, a child like Essie. Asterisk, she was clapping too, with a look on her face like she was reorganizing everything she thought she knew. I didn't feel triumphant about it, not exactly. I mostly just felt seen, for the first time in my whole life, all the way through. And it turns out being seen when you've spent years, hiding is a thing that hurts and heals in the exact same motion. After, in the hallway, with the cameras still rolling somewhere behind us, 3 people ended up in a little knot by the trophy case. Me, my mama still in her work shirt, and Earl. And my mother, who had cleaned that hospital's floors for 11 years and never once been thanked by name, took both of Earl Dunbar's hands in hers and couldn't get a single word out, just shook her head with the tears running, and Earl said to her, gentle, "Mrs. Boone, you raised somebody remarkable, and you did it on your feet after a full day's work, and I see that even if the world's been too busy to, the whole school's about to be different because of how you raised her." My mama made a sound I'd never heard her make. And then she looked at me, asterisk, still water runs deep, asterisk, and she didn't say "I told you so." She just put her arm around me and held on, and the 3 of us stood there in that loud hallway being quietly, completely undone. Tanya, the girl who used to say I wasn't a real person, came up later that week and awkwardly asked if I wanted to sit with them at lunch. I said no thank you, kindly. I'd found out I'd never needed the table. Here is what came after, and I'll give it to you straight, because some of it is the fairy tale ending, and some of it is better than that. Eastside got rebuilt, not torn down and replaced, rebuilt, repaired, made whole, the roof fixed and the heat working, and the buckets gone. From the hallways for the first time in anyone's memory. New books that had never been read, computers that turned on the first try. A music room got its instruments back. And the library. Oh, the library. Earl gave us a real one, bright and warm, 2 stories of shelves and big windows and chairs you actually wanted to fold up in. Books that smelled new. A whole corner just for the kids who needed somewhere quiet to be a part of the wall. He put one more thing in it too, because of his own long secret. A reading center. Open after school, free, staffed by tutors, for any kid who struggled with the letters and was too ashamed to say so. And, on certain evenings, for the grown folks too, the mamas and the grandfathers who'd left school early like he had, and carried it like a stone ever since. No Eastside kid, Earl said, was ever going to grow up to sit in a hospital chair too scared to admit he couldn't read his own forms. Over the door they put a plaque, and on the plaque, because Earl insisted and the school agreed, is my name. The Essie Boone Reading Room. A library named after a girl who used to hide in one, paid for by a man who couldn't read a word of the sign. If you wanted to make up something that perfect, you couldn't. The scholarships were real too. I went to college on one of them, the first in my family to ever go, and Earl quietly made sure my mama didn't have to choose between my books and her rent, and somewhere in there Charmaine Boone got to stop, mopping other people's floors and rest her swollen feet, which is its own happy ending I don't talk about enough. And when I came back with my teaching degree, there was a job waiting at Eastside if I wanted it, and I wanted it more than I've ever wanted anything in my life. So now I teach English in the building I tried to vanish from, and every year there's at least one of them in my class, the quiet one, the corner one, the kid the loud world reads right past, and I find them. I always find them. I was trained for it by an expert in being unseen, which is me, and I make sure that not one of those kids gets to spend 4 years thinking nobody's looking, because somebody is. I am. That's the whole job, really, under the grammar and the book reports. Seeing the ones who think they can't be seen, Last year there was a boy named Darnell who never spoke, never raised his hand, kept his hood up and his eyes down, and the other teachers had him filed already under won't engage. I watched him for 2 weeks before I figured out he wasn't checked out. He was hiding, the same way I'd hidden, because reading out loud terrified him, and the words came slow for him on the page, and he'd rather be thought lazy than be thought stupid, which is a trait I understood right down to the floor of me. So I didn't call on him. I left a note in his journal instead, just between us, that said I'd be in my room at lunch with the good snacks if he ever wanted to read with me, where nobody was watching. No big deal, just the two of us in a page. It took him a month to show up. He showed up. We read together at lunch all that year, line by line, patient, nobody making anybody small, and that boy reads aloud in my class now, hood down, and last week he argued with me about a book in front of everybody, loud and grinning and sure of himself. And I had to go into the supply closet for a minute because I was thinking about a thermos of watery cocoa and a man who pulled his chair over to mine. The circle keeps going around. That's the only thing I've found that's stronger than how it started. And Earl, my Earl, the best part of the whole thing, the part the cameras never got, is what happened to Earl Dunbar after he stood up in that gym and told the world his secret. Because once a thing is out in the daylight, it loses its power over you, and Earl, at 78 years old, finally did the thing he'd been too ashamed to do his entire life. He learned to read. He hired a tutor, a patient retired teacher named Mrs. Okafor, and he sat down with the letters that had beaten him as a boy, and he was stubborn as a mule about it the same way he'd been stubborn about everything, and slow, so slow, sounding out words at a kitchen table at an age when most men have given up learning anything new. He'd call me at college to report his progress like a kid bringing home a spelling test, prouder of a sentence than he'd ever been of a contract. I read the whole front of the cereal box this morning, he told me once, dead serious, like he'd summited a mountain. And I had to hold the phone away so he wouldn't hear me cry. He read the menu out loud at a restaurant for the first time in his life at 79, and made the waitress wait while he did it, slow, on purpose, just because he could. He read the plaque over the library door himself, asterisk the S.E. Boone Reading Room asterisk, standing in front of it sounding out my name, a man who'd built that whole room reading, the sign on it for the first time. And a custodian found him there crying, and didn't understand why, and Earl didn't explain, and the first whole book Earl Dunbar ever read all the way through by himself. Alone at his kitchen table near the end of a long life, he read it out loud to me over the phone, stumbling and triumphant, and then he said, I waited my whole life to be able to do this, and I'd have waited it all over again just to have met the girl who made me brave enough to try. He passed a few years ago, Earl did, an old man who died able to read his own name and a great deal more. And I was there, and I read to him at the end, the way I had at the beginning, line by line, slow and calm like a recipe, and it was the great honor of my life to close that circle. So here is the thing I've turned into a whole career out of believing, and what I most want to leave you holding. Every single person you will ever meet is carrying a form they're scared they can't read. It might not be letters. It might be a feeling they can't name, or a need they're too proud to say out loud, or a fear they've walled off and built a whole life around hiding, the way Earl built a company on top of his shame. Most people, when they bump up against somebody's hidden thing, do one of two things. They look away, or they make the person feel small for it. And there's a third thing, a rarer thing. The thing a quiet 12-year-old did by accident in a waiting room. You can sit down next to a person and help them with the thing they can't do, line by line, patiently, without ever once making them feel like less for needing the help. You can meet someone's shame with plain ordinary grace like it costs nothing, because it does cost nothing, and it is worth more than every dollar Earl Dunbar ever gave my school. The loud world thinks kindness has to be big to count. It doesn't. It just has to be patient, and it has to refuse to make anybody small. The biggest thing that ever happened to my whole school started with a watery cup of cocoa and a girl too shy to order a sandwich, sounding out a stranger's bad news in a corner where she thought no one would ever see. Nobody saw, and it changed everything anyway. That's the secret the quiet ones know, that the loud ones never learn. It was never about being seen while you did it. You don't have to be brave or loud or important to change the whole direction of somebody's life. You just have to be the one who notices the man holding the clipboard he can't read, and pull your chair over, and start at the top of the page. So tell me, and I'd truly love to know, who was the person who once helped you with the thing you were ashamed you couldn't do, and did it so gently it didn't even sting? The teacher, the stranger, the patient soul who read your hard page with you line by line. Put them in the comments, say their name if you remember it, and if you can't think of anyone, if nobody ever did that for you, then I'm sorry, and I'd like you to consider being that person for somebody else, because there is a quiet kid in a corner somewhere right now, and an old man holding a form he can't read, and the world is so very full of people just waiting for one person to pull up a chair.